Well, I'm in shorts, mate.
It's good. I've actually got so many photos of Alex now from all the tastings he's done that May's taken photos of. So I've got lots of things to choose from. But
that was all you could get from me, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
What about trousers?
I'm in shorts, mate. What?
It's good. I've actually got so many photos of Alex now. And I'll just check one other place that we should be going live, and then we can kick off. Yeah, and it's looking good from my end. And it is, I don't know what time it is where you are, but it's officially 7 o'clock here in Australia. So welcome, Alex, Bruce, and Connal Mackenzie, and thank you for joining us here at the second night of the inaugural Sydney Whisky Forum, our virtual replacement for the sadly missed Sydney Whisky Fair this year. Very, very quickly, you are not unfamiliar faces to oak barrel crowds. Adelphi as a brand has, had many appearances and many tastings at the oak barrel in the oak barrel tasting room, which is actually about 20 meters in front of me as the crow flies here in the bowels of the oak barrel. But in particular, it does feel like it wasn't that long ago, but it does feel like a previous lifetime when we were all in the same room together. And I can tell you exactly what day it was. It was Friday the 13th in 2020, because once again, you signed our board, and quite prophetically, there was a few little warning signs here about what was going to happen, because as we've sort of been reminiscing before we went live here, so that was quite an evening, quite a tasting, quite an evening as the world was falling around us, and we find ourselves, sort of six months down the track, or 5 or 6 months down the track, virtually tuning into from around the world, from Scotland and Australia to the Whisky Forum to share some whiskies and have a bit of a chat. But boys, welcome sort of virtually again, and hope you've been well and safe. How are you?
Look, we're great. It's a miserable Scottish day. It's full of water making whiskey, pouring from the sky. And what better time to be drinking whiskey at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Excellent.
Great to be back. Great to be back in the oak barrel. And as you said, that was the last real tasting, as in, real kind of in the right place, in live circumstances that we have done. And probably for you guys too.
Yeah, Andrew, yeah, we had a few things the next week, and are watching over the weekend. We shut everything down on Monday. So it was the last, and was a bit of a weird situation, I think. It's certainly the last time one of the last times I actually had a drink in a bar standing up as well, because we can go have a drink at the moment here in Australia, but you need to be seated and all that sort of thing. But it's a bit bizarre. Tonight we're going to talk through Adelphi and particularly from my point of view, Ardnamurchan and where we are with all of that. There's people, we're in the Zoom chat here. The links on the website has been emailed out to people. So there's a few people in the Zoom chat. There's a few people watching on social medias, and a quick good day to a few people there. Yao from the Elysian Bar down in Melbourne. Fortunately, they can't open. I think you guys will be very familiar with him. Mark Westmoreland from Wolfburn up in the north says, while Ben Barronow has been poking a bit of stick at Connal in the Zoom chat, Mark's been continuing on Facebook saying top blokes and Scott. So thanks for that, Mark. But evening things up. And Daniel Hooper out in Dubbo, I believe. Big fan of the stream, and friend of the Oak Barrel. But for those who are playing, who do have the samples tonight to drink along with us, correct me if I'm wrong, but if in case you want to get them in order, I think we're going to go Ardnamurchan 2019 AD, then Brisbane, then cask sample, 645p, then the Brisbane, and then the Jura single cask. But before we kick it off, and some people might want to pre-pour those whiskies, basically a quick update from you guys. I mean, it's been a long time, and it's been a very crazy period, but you guys have had plenty to do. So, I mean, how much has this affected, the rollout of Ardnamurchan and all the things that you should have been doing now in the past 5 months?
Well, I'll take this one, Alex. Yeah, so I don't know about down in Fife where you are. It might be raining, but it's beautiful up in the Highlands as always, weather-wise. And you're right, Scotty. The last pub I was in was with yourself. So it's literally been that long. We are allowed to go, but I wouldn't chance it up here just yet. So yeah, weird circumstances, but we've managed to keep going. So we literally got back to Edinburgh on the 15th of March, I think it was. And I drove straight up the A9 and we basically came up with plan B, and we've been operating that since. And we've been very lucky that Ardnamurchan distillery sort of shut down, and the visitor centre closed. And myself, Alex, and our operations director, Gordon Hamilton, we tracked on and tried and managed to get some new Adelphi lists out there, which was great. So we were still able to operate, and we also managed to get onto this virtual world quite quickly as well, which was a godsend, really. It was something for us to be able to still shout about and promote Adelphi and Ardnamurchan.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, Alex, we sort of hinted at it in the chat before we went live here. In like earlier this year, and it was probably a Dram Fest. Not many people will forget anytime soon either, particularly Dave Broom and people like that. But things were starting to get very, very exciting, around Ardnamurchan, and first releases on the horizon and that sort of thing. We spoke a lot about it in the tasting room. We've seen a lot of Australian distilleries who had their first release come up with different ways of how they approach that in the past 6 months. For you guys, in terms of your planning around that, and has that changed much at all? And like, how was Ardnamurchan affected? Did it, presumably would have had to shut down for a little bit, or?
Yeah. So in terms of how we're launching, nothing's changed. We've managed, as Connal said, we managed to keep a core team. 4 or 5 of us were working harder than ever through lockdown. And part of that work was making sure that not just the Ardnamurchan whiskey was ready for launch in October this year, but all the packaging, all the design work, everything else that goes around, behind the scenes. And that was probably the hardest part, because a number of companies were on lockdown and just not answering calls. They just weren't manufacturing. So it's been a scramble, but it's something that we're very good at doing. We like scrambling. We've been scrambling quite a lot over the last few years. And in terms of how we're doing it, as you know, we've got the first on taste tonight is the 2019 AD Spirit. Now that was the 4th in a line of annual releases of, if you like, work in progress Ardnamurchan. So the evolution of how our spirit was aging over the years. But you've also got to remember that we've been going now for over 6 years, and we haven't yet released our first big batch single malt. And my main reason for doing that, it wasn't just about the quality, because we were convinced that was already there at least 2 years ago. But it was, more importantly, it was about the quantity. And if you are going to launch something and put some noise behind it, and have it as your core product going forward, you've got to really make sure that you've got enough to back it up, second, third, fourth, batches. So that's kind of why we've been waiting. We've spent, Connal, myself, a couple of other colleagues, we literally locked down in the warehouses up there at the end of July, and sampled our way through row after row of casks. And the best thing, it wasn't just about the flavor, it was that we have consistency. So we literally tapped into one row and left the rest of it for the next batch or the batch after that. And we know it's there. And that's what's really exciting.
Yeah. I thought I was pretty lucky being locked down and being in the warehouse here, but being locked down in the Ardnamurchan warehouse, you might have had me pipped on that one. That sounds like a pretty good place to be, all things considered.
Yeah, no, we're just about encroaching on 10,000 casks now, so it's there was a lot to go looking for, but we found it probably a lot quicker than I expected to be honest. We had a really good first couple of days, and then started putting things together and sort of just trying things out, trying new things. And I think most of the team have actually tried 3 or 4 samples blind, and we all sort of have agreed on what we're going for. So the single malt is pretty much going to be ready by the end of September.
Yeah, awesome. So I've poured myself a little bit of 2019 AD. Maybe just have a quick chat. And it's always great to see UK and European guests cracking into the whiskies at 10 a.m. along with us Australians here at 7 p.m. So, well, excellent. Good to see.
It's not whiskey.
Yeah. While we're on these 2 Ardnamurchan and bottlings and we talk about them, I also would like to pick your brains a little bit about, the last decade essentially has seen such a huge influx in distilleries starting at not just in Scotland, but huge groundswell. I think it's like 28, 29 distilleries in England now, Ireland, in Australia. I think of the past, in these 3 months, we're seeing, 4 or 5 distilleries launch their first whiskey onto the market. What is Ardnamurchan, doing to sort of like stay true to what that is and not get caught up in hype and all those sort of things that are, is probably very tempting to do. What are you trying to achieve with the Ardnamurchan distillery in terms of a flavour profile? Obviously, there's sustainability and that sort of stuff. In terms of a flavour profile, what's the MO?
Do we do that one?
Yeah, on you go.
Well, we actually, it was a very similar question. We had our great mate, you just mentioned Dave Brum. He was up with his family for a couple of days, about 2 weeks ago, I think? Yeah. And I remember him asking a very similar question, standing in the lower warehouse, number 1. And my answer is very simple. We chose Ardnamurchan, this remote, rugged Highland West Coast, if you like, coastal peninsula. We chose it to build a distillery, not because we wanted it to be impossible to get to and all that kind of stuff, but most importantly, we chose it because of the climate and where it is and what it can do to whiskey. So what we've done is we built a distillery. We're trying to make the best possible spirit that we can, but everything else we're kind of handing over to the environment. We're letting it do the bit. So if, for example, I was to copy and paste Ardnamurchan and put it somewhere else in Scotland or somewhere else in the world, you would get a very different whiskey profile. The profile that we are naturally getting out there is a very maritime, very coastal profile. So it's got this huge sort of salinity. It's got a lovely kind of bonfire ember, kind of billowing smoke, but not acrid, not iodine, not Islay. It's a much more gentle Highland style in that respect. And then we've got some lovely sweetness and natural sweetness around honey and toffee and things like that. So yeah, it's a combination of, I say, it's coastal and Highland, and it is very true to where it is.
Did you know the terroir you were getting yourself into when you chose that location? Like, how could you foresee in 5, 10, 15 years time what effect that was going to have? Or was it just, this is where we are, let's see what happens?
Look, we hoped we would get it. We had no idea. I mean, we had tests done on the peat and stuff like that. Not that we're actually using the peat from there yet, but we're also very aware that the water comes off the hill looking like Coca-Cola. It's so dark, it's so peat rich. So even the reduction water that we're taking our spirit down to 63.5 when we're filling the casks, that is really peaty water, and that is having a massive influence. And then I am a great believer, not everyone is, but I am a great believer of when a cask is maturing, it's not just, giving out to the angels, it's also taking back. And it's very obvious when you walk into a proper Dunwich warehouse that smells and feels of, you get that alcohol kind of as soon as you walk in, that is absorbing sea air. We have massive gale force winds blowing the sea across the distillery at any given time. So we are absorbing that as well. So yeah, it was a hope, but it has been fulfilled.
Is there a marketing opportunity there to maybe do the Scotch and Coke, but with Ardnamurchan dark water? There's a bit of a market for that sort of carry on in Australia. Get a bit of duct tape, stick them together.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Complete with essence of dead sheep and things like that.
There's plenty of it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and a quick g'day to Johnny Raff as well, who's I think spent a lot of time with you guys on the Facebook there. So I mean, we have where we're sitting with the people who have got the sample and myself, and there's a lot of people at home that have potentially got one of these bottles. We've seen the development of the Spirit AD sort of stocks, and mildly peated, a lot of sherry cask influence a lot of the time. Is this what you would consider, I think you mentioned before, like a work in progress? Is this very reminiscent of what we're likely to see in a finished product Ardnamurchan core range?
No, actually. So all the AD spirit releases have all been from sort of first fill X sherry. So it's all been from Oloroso and PX and a variety of different casks. So in the beginning, the 2016 was pretty much all from octaves, which are sort of 55 litre small, quick maturing casks. And then as time went on, we started using hogsheads, and then eventually 2018 and 2019 featured sherry bats, so the big 500 litre fills, but all from ex-sherry. The one you're having now is about 60% unpeated, 40% peated, just over 5,000 bottles, and it has 2 sherry bats, 6 hogsheads, and 20 octaves in the mix. So in regards to Ardnamurchan single malt, and the way we've been filling is we fill ex-bourbon casks and ex-sherry casks, but we've obviously got a lot more bourbon casks maturing. It's just the way of it. So the actual mix is pretty much how we produce on a yearly basis. So I think, Alex, you might correct me, I might get this slightly wrong, but 65% ex-bourbon casks and about 35% Oloroso and PX hogsheads and bats, which feature in the single malt, which we're about to launch, as I said, in the next sort of six to 7 weeks. So this is a lovely way of showing the spirit and how it performs in sherry, but the Ardnamurchan single malt will not be like this, I suppose. Obviously it'll have similar characteristics, but it will not be the same.
No, the core is there. I mean, what's really fascinated us when we've been sampling the casks for the last kind of year or two, and especially putting the single malt together, the ones that have really surprised us about how they've come on and how they've developed their own character, which is unique, are the ex-bourbon peated. So upstairs, warehouse number 1, we've got this, you can just see behind Connal, actually, there's a picture of the distillery, and the big sort of white building at the back is the first warehouse, which is split into 2 levels. So the lower level is almost underground. It's the rock face comes down and the water pours around it. So you've got great humidity and temperature control. Upstairs, it's just under the roof space. It's a concrete floor, so it has much more temperature fluctuation. It will get up to the high 20s in the summer and down to about 1 or 2 in the winter. So up there, you've got accelerated maturation, you've got retention, or even like you get in Australia, the alcohol's possibly even going up in some cases. But the volume is coming down, so the angels are much more greedy. So the 2015 peated bourbons up there that we've chosen for the single malt going forward, if you like, have got this beautiful kind of briny oyster shell characteristic, which we weren't getting a huge amount of in the AD series. In the AD series, we're getting more about the toffee and the honey and stuff like that. So if you're adding a bit more salt and seaside into this spirit, you're getting closer to what the single malt's going to be.
Yeah, we had quite a fascinating chat last night in the opening night of the forum with a range of independent bottlers, and it was fascinating listening to Alistair Walker, who's come from Benriach Distilling Company, straight into infrequent flyer. So he's been on the side of, I don't want to give casks away, to now give me all your casks. Whereas you guys, you've sort of been straddling that the whole way and are going to keep straddling that. So you seem to, have a good idea of, what's out there distillery wise, and then everyone else is doing, and then what you're doing as well. Do you think all the distilleries are using the terroir of their locations as well as they could be? How you're sort of enhancing that in Ardnamurchan? Because it's not something that's traditionally spoken about for Scotch single malt.
It's a tricky one. I mean, there was, again, going back to Dave, he wrote a big article for, I think, Whiskey Magazine in France recently on whether terroir is a word that we should be using in Scotch at all. And I think I contributed. I can't actually remember what I said now, embarrassingly. It
must have been good.
It's not so much, it's not so much about the grape and the vine and the roots going into the chalky soil and stuff like that. Barley is hugely important as a flavour contributor, but less so about where it's grown potentially. It's more about making sure it's grown well and gives you good yield. And the different varieties of barley are the bit that gives it the different flavour. But terroir in whiskey terms, yes, it could be described as the environment, if you like, where your distillery is. But also it's about the people who make the stuff and what they've learned generation on generation. And unfortunately, there is, you might say that in the past, there has been some gimmickry around, from marketing departments around potentially what we should be shouting about as a distillery. So should we be shouting about, I don't know, the river or stuff like that? I mean, yes, water is a huge important part in reduction and stuff like that, but the cooling water, no, it just, it comes in one end and goes out the other. And whether your still has a certain dent in it, does that make a big difference to the flavor profile? So there are lots of things which have been picked up on in the past which maybe shouldn't have. From my point of view and from what we're trying to do, we're just trying to be an open book. So we're being as transparent as we possibly can, using the blockchain principle, if you like. And it's up to the consumer to decide what fact in that kind of supply chain of production is the most important to them.
Yeah, I'm very interested to talk about the blockchain, but I think we might get into that on the Brisbane in a couple of drams, because I think that was the first one to carry blockchain, if memory serves, or was one of the
it's the first whiskey.
First whiskey, yeah, sorry, yeah, probably the AD Spirit.
Yeah.
But if you do have some samples at home, be aware that these are all cask strength and they're 30 mils. If we were doing this in person, we'd be doing 15 mil pours, so don't need to drink it all. But I might move on to the second whiskey, which is a bit of a cask sample from Ardnamurchan, prompted by Yao from the Elysian, who's asked a question. He's getting a nice reflection of that climactic maritime character showing itself, particularly through the bourbon casks. Do you think it'll shine as much in the unpeated spirit, or is the peated spirit bringing out that element more?
What did you find, Connal? Can you remember in the unpeated?
Unpeated's more, you talking about peatiness, because it's, the unpeated, it's all about tropical. Yeah, no, it's there. There's that saltiness, I think, but I wouldn't. It's not as heavy on the peated. The peated barrels show it a lot better, I think. The unpeated bourbon casks are just bananas and tropical fruits and just almost confectionery, which is just lovely, to be honest. It really is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We do have some. What is 645P? I'm going to take a wild step and say the P is for peated.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Got that one right. Yes. See, I haven't. This is my first day at this game.
That's all right. Yeah. Nothing gets past you.
Yeah. But a couple of questions I'm going to feed into one here. Daniel Turner asks, what ABV is the single going to be at? But larger than that, when you've got those really tropical fruit bourbon casks and you got that maritime smoky element, that like the blending of that into a sustainable, consistent single malt is different than creating a great single cask. What sort of different skills are involved, and how do you go about actually creating a single malt, expression from nothing? So you don't have last year's Johnny Walker Red to make this year's Johnny Walker Red. You're creating something from nothing. What's the process behind that? If
I'm absolutely brutally honest, we didn't know until we started. we had lots of contingency plans about bringing in the experts. But look, what we basically did was we went and camped out in the warehouses. We sampled, we broke open, casks row by row. We nosed each cask, and anything that we liked, we put in a sample bottle. We then took the sample bottles and retired to our own private castle, of all things, which we'd rented on the peninsula for 2 weeks. We sat about, we basically spent, 3 or 4 days? And the first thing we did was we took all the samples and blended them in the right proportions. And then we looked at them individually as single casks. And we're talking, 80, 90, 100 casks here. So it was quite a hard work. We looked at them as single casks. We removed a small handful that we didn't feel passed it as a single cask. And then we blended that to what was left. Then we thought, well, let's look a bit more peaty. So we took out some of the unpeated and put more peated in. And we looked, so all these different steps. Now, the fourth step, should we have not have found one that we liked, the fourth step was going to be to build from scratch. So we would have taken, a peated and unpeated, and then we had another peated and unpeated, and we would have kept building it like a kind of Lego house until it went off style, and then we would remove that last layer and gone off again in a different tangent. Luckily, we didn't have to get to that stage because that would have taken a long time. But the great thing is what we have chosen is not only, as Connal said, it's not only a perfect mirror, if you like, of what we've been producing year on year. So 50-50 peated, unpeated, 65-35 bourbon sherry. But it's also, we reckon that we're going to get more than we need for the first batch. And any leftovers will get put into a vat as the start of a Solera system that we'll then create to keep consistency reasonably good going forward.
Yeah, it just sounds like hell having to go through all those whiskey samples in a castle, because that's just the way Ardnamurchan does things. Yeah. On that note,
that sounds so bad.
Yeah, it does. I'm not going to lie. But Connal, how long have you been with the company now? It's
just over 2 years now since I returned back from New Zealand. So yeah, I was obviously at Whiskey Galore prior, but I've been with Adelphi now for 2 and a bit years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the team, the Adelphi cask selections, and Ardnamurchan was up and running. People are already sampling these casks and they know what they're looking for in barrels. How was it for you coming into the company and sort of giving your input and giving your spin from a palate that is obviously your own and so probably a little bit different to everyone's? Yeah,
look, my role's been extremely varied from the get-go, which has been wonderful, to be honest. And I've been very privileged to sort of cement myself in that tasting panel and that selection panel. Putting together the single malt was it was unbelievable to be part of that and that journey. And I've kind of just walked in at the sort of at the end, if you like, and taking all the credits. And we've built the team. We've just taken someone else on into the sales team, a chap called Graham Mackay. So he's now alongside Antonia, myself, and Alex. And we're just about to announce someone else who's come on. So we built the team quite rapidly in the last sort of 6 months. But listen, it's to be part of it and to go through those 90 samples and really just spin things off each other. We had some other bits and pieces to compare to, so we weren't going too far away where the style we wanted to have. It was great to be part of it. It really was.
Yeah. Just on that note, then I've been lucky enough to have a cask sample in front of me of 645P. I don't know if you recall this cask and remember exactly, because I'm sure that you remember each cask individually by photographic memory. But what was it about this cask that you chose to not only involve in the process, but then to give us as a bit of a single cask sample to look at? I mean, it's a beautiful barrel and there's so much going on. So a few comments coming through, big multi-flavors, people assuming it's a bit of an ex-bourbon cask, but there's huge amounts of complexity on this.
think 645P, is that an American oak ex sherry cask maybe?
No, it's Spanish.
Well, it's
I'm
Spanish.
just looking it up. It's Spanish oak hogshead, Oloroso, filled on the 9th of October 2015. So it's, what was that, 4 years old, just coming up for 5. And is in the upper warehouse. So it's getting that accelerated maturation from warehouse number 1, upper floor.
Yeah. Do you look into that? I mean, you've got the magic book there. When you're drawing casks, are you looking at, okay, the upper level, we might look at them more regularly than the lower levels, you know, which is a very, you know, it's heightened in Australia and America with bourbon, but, you know, probably doesn't get talked about as much in Scotland. But is that something you're mindful of?
Absolutely. Look, there's 2 things that happened in the early years at Ardnamurchan. We were one of, after Kilhoman, we were one of the first distilleries to be designed pretty much by the late great Dr. Jim Swan. Jim is, you know, he had his legacy of everything from Cavalan to you name it, all around the world, Penderyn. He's done a huge amount. But what he said to us was, because he helped me a huge amount in the design stage, and then he said, look, I want you guys just to go off and start up, run it for 6 months, and then I'll come in and I'll work out the best recipe for your spirit. So, look, I don't know if you can see this, but we've got a very interesting delivery coming in. Can you see out the window?
Normally I'd quote cricket scores or soccer scores to say prove we're live, but here we've got live deliveries into Ardnamurchan. Is that a boat? Is that the boat? Your boat?
That is a lorry delivering casks.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Not the new super yacht to go next to the castle.
Yeah. So yeah, Jim said I'll be up in 6 months and we'll help. And so all the earlier, so 2014, if you like, that was a slightly heavier spirit, and we laid it in the lower warehouse, so that was the stock that's going to age for 15, 18, 21 years, whatever. It's in the perfect environment. It's a bit more fainty, so it requires longer aging. And then he came and waved his magic wand, and most of that stock went into the upper warehouse as a start, if you like. So the upper warehouse, not just because of the climate, but also because of Jim's recipe, is a much quicker maturing part of the warehousing. And then the subsequent warehousing, so we've got now 3 more up the hill with a further 2 to come. That is kind of halfway house. So it is traditional Dunwich earth floor, but it's single story, so it's closer to the roof. So we've got that kind of combination between 1 and 2. But yeah, no, it is very important, and we're monitoring them. And, you know, we're going to talk about blockchain later, but just one of its attributes is that we can literally have this system of each cask having its own DNA, if you like, and we'll have a beautiful snapshot at any time of hot spots and cold spots and how things are maturing in different places in the warehouses that we'll be able to track really, really carefully.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of concept's fascinating. I remember being down at Starwood, you know, where they were trying to heat map their distillery and find all those, you know, pressure points and that sort of thing. And that was informing how far away they were putting their casks and all that sort of stuff. And before we segue into, you know, the Brisbane and talk about that, and with new casks being delivered as we speak, how hard has it been for a new distillery to find the quality and quantity of casks that you want? I mean, more distilleries opening up every day. You hear stories about particularly European oak, and anything ex-sherry of its, you know, worth is becoming very, very expensive. How hard was it to actually source those casks and continually source those casks?
I'll pick this up again just because it was part of our journey. So we had again Jim Swan. I mean, he was not only a famous distillery designer, but he was also his other great attribute was he had fantastic wood supply connections around the world. So one of them was fairly plain sailing. It was with a very well-known bodega down in Jerez, who many Scotch distilleries use or had used and continue to use. The other one caused me a few sleepless nights. He introduced me, and I went out to see the team at Beam and Jim Beam, and we shook our hands on a contract to start supplying us from what would have been about March 2014, so just ahead of us going live with production. The day I rang up to order the first shipment, first container of bourbons, was the day that they merged. They had the joint venture, or whatever it is, with Suntory, and all contracts were off the table. So there was a bit of a scramble, but we ended up with a very good partnership with a cooperage that comes out of Brown-Forman. And because, again, we were the first guys to start really with that cooperage, we've got a nice relationship going. And then over the years, we've found a couple of quirky suppliers as well that can add. I mean, we're not going mad on different woods. We're, as I said at the beginning, we're very much about keeping it Ardnamurchan and letting the environment speak for itself. But every now and then we'll buy a small parcel of different casks just to have a little bit of a different flavor profile for a special edition or something.
Yeah, awesome. So we're sorry.
No, it was just before we move on to the next drum, I was just going to talk to a little bit about the sort of inaugural launch in regards to what's actually coming out to market. We've actually got three different bottlings coming out as part of the inaugural release, and we're going to have the single malt itself, and then we're going to have we've identified a single cask, so there will be a single cask release, and we're also doing a tasting pack, so it will be a 4 5cl bottle tasting pack, so we can actually do events like we're doing right now around the world. So there's going to be a little bit of that for everyone, hopefully. So, the single cask, thankfully, was a puncheon. So it's a refill Oloroso sherry puncheon. The single malt, we're aiming for about 15,000 bottles. And the tasting pack, we're probably going to get about 3,500 bottles out there. So there should be enough for everyone to get a wee bit and join us somewhere around the world for a dram.
Yeah, you say that now there's going to be enough, but we've seen this happen with Adelphi before. So we'll be the judge. The consumers will be the judge of whether there's enough. But before we do move on to anything else, and because, I do want to look to the future quite a bit with tonight, and, Ardnamurchan is very, very exciting. I know that you two are both, arms, up to your elbows, basically in the final touches on design and all the other auxiliary things that come along with launching a whiskey. Could you maybe give some insight into the things that we maybe don't think of? You've got a whiskey, you put it into a bottle, you release it to market, people like it or they don't, happy days. But the packaging, because presumably that's going to be your first impression for a lot of people.
Have I frozen? Is he there? What's going on? Are you there? Maybe it's our Scottish connection. What's going on?
People moving forward, and let me one shot at a first impression. Am I back? I've just been talking to myself for a little bit. Every now and again, I just like to put myself in the corner and say, "You've had too much. Take a time out and come back." So I'll start again, but just quickly, I don't know how much of that you got, but what is the what are some of the unforeseen things about launching a brand new single malt to the market that a consumer might not see in terms of packaging and you've got a few thousand, but not a huge amount. Where do they go? All that sort of stuff. How long does that take to work through?
Well, it's a funny one. I mean, we're small enough and flexible enough to get things done pretty quickly. I mean, just as an example, that the whole fusion whiskey concept, which came about in 2015. So with the Glover, I remember, launching in Australia. I think after Tokyo, you were the first guys to see it.
We just happened to be there for seismic moments. Something about the oak barrel.
But the concept, as in the idea of blending international whiskey named after old famous Scots and stuff, that was February 2015, and I think the launch was October. So we'd done the whole thing, including buying the Hanyu from Ichiro, working out the law with the SWA, the packaging, the labeling, everything. in that space of time, and shipping as well. So we have got a background of kind of running by, on very short timelines. We've given ourselves potentially 2 rods for a back for Ardnamurchan. One is we want to be naturally sustainable. We feel very. Have you frozen again?
Yeah, but we'll just carry on.
Well, we'll just carry on.
Yeah.
We feel it's very important as a modern distiller that we should be, the carbon footprint should be as low as possible. We should be having a very light touch on our environment. And it's not just about the way we make the whiskey, it's about everything else, the packaging as well. So it actually took us quite a long time to find as sustainable as possible.
Oh, he's actually gone.
Do you think anyone else is here?
Oh, he's come back.
Oh, he's back. Excellent.
I think to say about the packaging. I mean, we were literally on a Zoom chat prior to this tasting we've got tonight, and we were finalising something to do with packaging. So we're still finalising the other bits and pieces. So it is and as a small company, as Alex said, we've got that luxury that we can chop and change things quite quickly and be reactive. You all right there, Scott?
Yeah, don't mind me. Talk amongst yourselves.
We have
been, yeah.
Good, yeah. And I do apologise about that.
One fly in the ointment, which is a really good fly in the ointment, is the fact that so we want this balance. The core single malt that we're producing, it's a decent batch size. It's 16,000 bottles at a time, but we are doing it as a batch rather than the same product, to look at time on time. And if you're doing something as a batch, every time you do one, you're having to start, with fresh set of labels, a fresh set of boxes, a fresh everything. And one of the reasons we're doing it this way is because the blockchain element of it, to authenticate each bottle individually for that, authenticity and all the rest of it. Each bottle is secretly digitally encoded and numbered. You've got to batch it. You can't just have a rolling database of numbers. You've actually got to say, right, here are 15,873 codes for the first batch, and then you start again. So we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot slightly, but we feel it is really important that we do this from the outset.
Yeah. I mean, when you first announced that this technology was going into the Ardnamurchan releases, and then things after that, I think there was a lot of, hey, this is a really cool idea, and this is really progressive, are using great technologies out there in the world at the moment. But then also, I think there was an element of, but so what are you going to do with that? And it wasn't until I got a bottle and scanned it, and I know, the person who bottled it, I know what he had for breakfast that morning. And then I went, okay, that's where I'm seeing the value. Is that where you see the value in it as well?
Going forward, and this is, in Connal's department completely, but it's very much that interactive element from source to consumer is hugely important in the modern world. And being able to, I don't want to use the word educate, it's more about just open the book to the consumer, let them see as much as they want to see. That is really, really important. And then getting the feedback as well. But from our point of view as the manufacturer, there is also equal importance around the stock system. And the fact that, with the touch of a button, I'll know exactly what I've got, what it's doing, how it's maturing, et cetera, and the authenticity and the tracking, so we can prevent parallel trading, which is so important when you're creating a new brand. So yeah, there's arms and legs all over the place. But the consumer interface, the interaction will be really important going forward.
And Connal, just on that, from your point of view, and a window into the mind of raw potential consumers, and I'm sure we are all going to go out and grab a bottle. What is it about putting your phone up to the back of the bottle that we're going to be able to understand that's something that excites you about that potentially, apart from a barcode, I can't scan too much on the back of too many other bottles?
Yeah, I mean, we're working on it now. I mean, the AD sort of the QR code, what took you into that sort of holding page was great, and it did explain lots of information. But we're trying to make this sort of much more friendly. There's going to be videos, there's going to be a lot more content and information, and it's just going to be a lot brighter and easier to use. So we're currently developing that now, and it's all looking very good. In fact, we went through a tutorial last night on where we're at with it, and I must say it's looking very, very, very cool. So, and it's yeah, as I said, it's a bit of it's a pain in the arse, to be honest. All this uploading of information, and but we're literally opening our books to everyone who's interested to look at them. But I think the benefits for the drinker, for the whiskey enthusiast, and for ourselves outweigh the pain in the arse, the extra step from a production point of view. We've got nothing to hide, and it's just great to show people what we're doing. It's all there, neat and tidy. It's not, we're not killing lots of trees to include booklets. It's just a wee QR code that then, everyone's got a smartphone these days, so it's just there for you. It's there for the taking,
Yeah, and we're all for silver linings here. And I remember that about 10, 15 years ago, we tried to break QR codes in Australia, and it failed miserably. No one knew how to use them. I remember working in the publishing industry back then. Could not get people. We could get them to look at it, couldn't get them to scan it. Now walking into every venue in Australia at the moment, you have to QR code scan in to have a drink. So we are ready. Australia is ready to use QR codes on the back. We haven't been ready yet, but we are now ready. 2020 has made us ready for QR codes.
There's not many things you can thank COVID for, but that's one thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Education on use of QR codes.
Yeah. I've got a couple of samples in front of me, so I'm going to move on to the Brisbane now, which is a whiskey very close to my heart as an Australian whiskey drinker. But for me, almost keeping on the thread of, the Ardnamurchan and what's coming up. I remember first trying this down at the Starwood Distillery at a Whiskey and Dreams function in one of the little private tasting rooms. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the questions that came up that day was, how do you, what casks do you look at Starwood's inventory and say, I want to select them, and how do you match them? Which for us, I think, as drinkers, was a little bit of a window into the mindset of blending, what Ardnamurchan might be in the future. So, I think it stood the test of time. It's now a couple of years old, I think.
2018.
Yeah. So, this release now, and it's a blend of Starwood and some Scotch whiskey for people who aren't familiar with it. But where does this sit for you in the canon of Adelphi and the Fusion series?
So the Brisbane, I can't remember, it was the third or the fourth different one we did. Because we had the Glover, which is Japanese. We had the E&K, or Kincardine, as it was called, with India, with Amrut. I think Brisbane was next with Starwood, and then the Winter Queen with Zuidam in the Netherlands. So those are the four we've done so far. The long-term picture that we've already kind of kicked off with the Glover is that we start using Ardnamurchan as the base of the Scottish element, rather than just random single cask. But we will use what is suitable with whoever we're blending with. To cut a long story short, I was very fortunate when we were starting to design Ardnamurchan. Part of my trips around the world, just doing the normal whiskey tastings and things, we were taken to new distilleries which had just started. So I remember with Charlie McLean walking into Starwood's first distillery in an aircraft hangar
in Essendon,
in Melbourne. Yeah, and it was just this, because to me, I have pictures of distilleries being these old stone buildings with waterfall, and big pools and Dunwich warehouses and stuff. So walking into this aircraft hangar with what looked like laboratory boffins, professors running around in white coats, was just extraordinary. It was a completely new world of distilling, for whiskey anyway, to me. and Charlie. But what struck us and what became the kind of core of the fusion idea going forward was that they were making a whiskey that was true to where it was being made. So they knew their maturation climate was going to be, or the window, of maturation was going to be 4 or 5 years before the Angels nicked all of it, just like Amber in Bangalore. So they knew that they had to make a fruit-driven spirit. The spirit off the still had to be really drinkable because it only had a few years to mature. Now, you lose yield by doing that, by playing around with yeast and all the rest of it, but you only have 3 or 4 years when you've got a finished product that you can sell. So the financial side gives and takes, if you like. Anyway, we're blown away by it. Followed David, as he progressed and moved into the new distillery. But for this release, the Brisbane, we were very lucky that he actually let us buy a couple of his really early casks, from that original distillery. So these casks were from 2012, I think, 2013, maybe, from memory. So way back at the beginning.
I remember. Yeah, it was cask 86, which was 100 litre Apera cask, 333, which was 100 litre Apera, and 574, 200 litre Apera. But 86, that is cask 86th ever filled at Starwood for those playing at home, where they're well past 3 digits at the moment.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, they were extraordinary, and the samples. I brought some samples back from my trip, and I went up to the distillery, and previous distillery manager, a guy called Fraser Hughes, fantastic guy, whose father had rebuilt Glengarry distillery and restarted. Fraser had also been the manager at Glengarry in the late 90s, and we ended up using 2 sherry hogsheads that Fraser had actually made in 1998. So we blended Glengarry and Starwood as the main constituents. So it was a really nice kind of, and it was completely by chance. It just worked. 2 big sherry Glengarry with some pretty heavy sherried Starwood, and the balance was really nice. And then we just kind of sweetened it off a bit with, from memory, a Glen Grant sherry, quite an old one actually.
Yeah, I think it was an 88.
Yeah, and again, it's a 5-year-old whiskey because the youngest element is 5 years old. In this case, Starwood, which is actually probably equivalent to about an 18 or a 20-year-old in terms of Scotch. But we were chucking in things like 29-year-old Glen Grant because it tasted, blended well. We're not worried about using these older things if it's going to make it a better whiskey. It's all about creating the best blend.
Yeah, on that note, you were talking about, coming on board and stuff for the Adelphi Scotty. I mean, that was one of my first projects, I suppose, was sitting around the table with Alex and Charlie and Lucy at the time, and we were putting together the second batch of the Winter Queen. And it was some of Patrick's oldest casks from Zaidam, and I think they were 19-year-old.
Yeah. And
we were blending it with 25-year-old Mortlach and 19-year-old Bowmore, and then these 1980s Tianich come out, and it was just, it wasn't quite lab coats and fancy equipment, but we were just putting everything in and seeing what happened and then reducing it and all the rest of it. It was just a crazy but lovely experience, blending all these whiskies. But it took a long time. That I remember it took at least a week for that one to get put together. So yeah, lots of fun. It's lots of fun to do. It's a great project.
It's really exciting. The flavour spectrum is just so different to work with. And, we're also, the other purpose of it was to promote the lives of Scots who had kind of made a mark in the countries that we're blending with. I mean, Thomas McDougall Brisbane, no one's ever heard of him back here. You've obviously heard of him because there was a city named after him, but probably not a huge amount of his history. I mean, from memory, he was next in line after Macquarie. He was Lachlan Macquarie, who was much more famous as a governor of New South Wales. Brisbane actually brought about a lot more change in agriculture and alcohol sort of release of prohibition, if you like, or repeal of prohibition. So he was great for whiskey, for your whiskey industry going forward. And the reason Brisbane, I think, was named after him is he was the one that converted it from what was basically a convict colony into a proper town, a free town. And so it was named after him. But no, he was very fond of Australia. He even called one of his sons Australius Brisbane. Australius McDougall Brisbane when he came home.
That's a fair name.
Yeah, I was going to say that. No, that kid's not getting picked on in the playground.
No.
I mean, like the Adelphi Ardnamurchan, the whole business is quite multifaceted. There's a few things going on, but for those people who are not familiar with fusion, that's essentially what it is. It's finding these new worlds, for lack of a better word, distilleries, and blending them back with Scotch whiskies to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Is it an ongoing series? We're going to see more fusion releases into the future. Was that a one-off?
No, absolutely. We're always looking for other countries as well. We've been in discussions with quite a few. The last one obviously was the Glover Batch 5, which was Ardnamurchan and Chichibu. And I was delighted to be very involved with that in regards to even from driving the casks down to Norfolk to do the blending, but in the back of my Volkswagen Caddy van. That was an interesting drive, 8 hours south. But definitely. And hopefully, if all going well, we'll have another fusion in 2021.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely. There's for those who are playing at home, if oakbarrel.com.au/forum, I've linked to all the whiskies we're trying today. So more details on the exact cask numbers and everything of the Brisbane is there on the website if you want to go take a look at that link. But I think this is a great example of those young, those young but the older edge of the Starwoods that we try here, often the single cask expressions, have that real fruit muscularness to them. They're berries, but they're concentrated berries, and it has that, the Brisbane. But then it's got that sort of that length and those sort of waves of complexity, which sometimes we miss in Australia because we mature so quickly. Our whiskies physically don't get the time to develop a finish and some complexity sometimes. And so this is quite an interesting whiskey because I can taste the Australian DNA in it, but it's not an Australian whiskey. There's things there that are quite foreign. But,
that's the fun part of it, as I say, is creating this, as you said, creating a blend which is almost greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, to me, Starwood, certainly back then, it was all about bananas, really rich kind of toffee, banoffee, that kind of style. And that definitely comes through on it, on the Brisbane.
Yeah. If you walked around Essendon, you could swear someone's opened a packet of those banana lollies somewhere just behind you or just in front of you. I'm wary of the fact that while we get to keep drinking and partying all night, it is the start of your day. So we move on with a little bit of haste into the final whiskey that I've got in front of me tonight, which I'm fascinated by. It's part of the most recent Adelphi allocation into Australia, 1998 Jura 21-year-old. And we had a fascinating chat last night on the forum panel with independent bottlers, and it sort of came up some of our distilleries that we love through Indies, and Jura was one of the distilleries where personally I think the official bottlings can be great and they can be a little bit insipid sometimes, but I've had some cracking Jura single casks, and just a distillery that continues to surprise you what was it about this cask when you came across it sort of said, okay, this is Adelphi worthy?
I'll take that one, I think. No, the reason why is even now I'm still on the fence about this cask. I mean, it is a weird whiskey for me, but it'll separate the room usually when I've used it in tastings, even virtually. We did one for the London Whisky Club for about 80 folk, and it completely separated the room, 50-50 split. Some people thought it was one of the best whiskies they've tried, and some people thought it was just too odd, if you like. I've just pulled up our official tasting notes that I remember writing because we were at Alex's dining room table doing it, and it was honestly, what have we got? Colour of old oak from a refill Oloroso sherry hogshead, 21 years old. On the nose, we found space hoppers. window putty, and oodles of marzipan, with fruitcake, Nutella, and rice pudding, and a fair amount of Dunwich funk. The palate delivers Underberg bitters, juicy sultanas, sugared almonds, Stollen cake with clove syrup, and finishing herbaceous. It's all over the show. But so, what it does do, in typical Adelphi fashion, is it's big, it's bold, and it has big flavors, and that's exactly what we do when we sit down the table and discuss what's going to go into single casks, and that's the main component. Would you have another dram of it, for better or for worse? I mean, it's one of these whiskies you need to try a couple of times just to work it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, a 21-year-old 1998, anything's not going to be a particularly cheap cask, particularly from a known distillery with established single malt brands on the market. Is that when sort of the Adelphi like discovery element kicks in? It's something that is fascinating. You look at it and you're aware that it might go either way, but it's unique and it's going to maybe open people up to something they won't try any other way. Is that sort of the mindset behind bottling something like this?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the easiest way of explaining how Adelphi or why Adelphi bottles a cask, as Connal said, it's about drinkability. It's about wanting to have that second sip, about wanting to keep coming back to it, rather than, having the most famous ever distillery and vintage and going, wow, I've got that, but never actually opening it or drinking it. Adelphi is completely opposite. It's about drinking, enjoying, talking, chatting amongst friends, and wanting to come back for more. So it's got to be interesting. And the Jura does not disappoint. It's just multi-layered, not the most balanced whiskey you'll ever try in your life, but it's just got bags and bags of different flavor.
Yeah. See, for me, I'm a fan of this. I find Jura sometimes can be a little bit clumsy or a little bit thick. The flavors aren't quite as precise as they could be. The layers here are really well formed, I think. There's different things every time I go back to it.
It's extraordinary. I mean, I'm picking up gooseberries, which I've never had in this before. Maybe just because that time of day.
Yeah, Oliver Marudo, I think, agrees with you there. It's marzipan in a bottle. He says it's so dry and funky. Yeah, I can see that. And I think in general, Jura is a polarizing distillery, as Ben points out. And I think he's right there. I think it's certainly a distillery that I've appreciated more of in the past sort of couple of years than I have in the past. But I mean, that's another example of, and it wasn't just Adelphi, there's been other independent bottlers that have done Juras that have changed my mindset of what Jura can be.
Yeah, we haven't bottled a huge amount from Jura. We had, back in the early days, we had some younger, I think they might have been 98s as well, but they were like 10 years old, first fill bourbons. And they were like sweetie shops. They were extraordinary, completely atypical. We will never turn a whiskey down, a cask down, if it's exciting. It doesn't matter where it's from, how old it is. You also briefly mentioned about pricing. I mean, obviously nowadays, once you're getting into the older, anything pretty much 15 to 18 plus, you're having to spend a lot more than you used to, because that age of whiskey is not really available as it used to be. The last whiskey lock has dried up. So yeah, you in the back of your mind, you've got to just have that. You've got to be thinking a little bit about how much this is going to end up on the shelf at. But generally speaking, we will buy and bottle anything that we like because of taste as a predominantly.
Just a question on that. You've sort of tweaked something that, again, we've been talking about quite a bit here, is with the disruption of 2020, whatever that looks like, and it doesn't necessarily affect, the smaller businesses, but the big businesses, it's definitely affected them. Are we expecting to see a tightening of stock made available on the brokerage market, or more stock put on the brokerage market for independent bottlers to potentially get the hold on, or is it too early to tell? Are there any signs of what it might mean from how the bigger companies are going to play this?
From a bigger company point of view, I'm not sure, but I know that from brokers, I've been getting a lot of lists put in front of my nose. and quite exciting whiskies on them as well. So I don't know what that means, but you know, I'm seeing probably slightly more, if you like, choice. I mean, some of the prices are interesting, but yeah, to say the least.
Hold it, Alex. Yeah. Hold it.
But yeah, no, it's still out there, very much so. And you know, we've managed to. I say we, like, yeah, I'm taking credit for it. Alex has managed to develop some pretty great relationships over the years, and that's what it's all about. The industry, you know, you talk about relationships, and that's how we've managed to sort of get our hands on some pretty extraordinary casks over the years, and we're very lucky to have had that and to continue with it. It's usually about Alex sort of losing golf 3 times a year, and we seem to get some good casks when that happens. So
yeah, that does work that way. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, the direct effect of lockdown on distilleries has been that most of them closed down for a short space of time. Some single operator distilleries were able to continue. The biggest problem that the smaller ones had, like ourselves, was not about social distancing in production, but in warehousing. So when you're doing stacking a Dunwich stove, for example, you've got to be pretty close to the guy next to you. So yes, there may be a small shortage for a small amount of time in 5 years' time, or whenever that gap, if you like, is coming to market. But at the moment, I don't foresee any big changes in terms of filling contracts, general day-to-day life. Connal mentioned there's a lot of lists on the go at the moment, but this is a new wave of buying and selling casks. This is very much a retail auction-led, pretty expensive way of buying and selling a cask. And it's not something that is a traditional independent we will really be getting involved in. It's scary prices. Ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, we see it here. The Oak Barrel has done a few bottlings over the years directly with distilleries as sort of exclusive official bottlings. But then, again, with yourselves and other independent bottlers, we've done that. We've noticed in the past 2 years, or myself, that the stuff, cask samples, by the time they get to Sydney, they've probably gone through Europe and Asia, and stuff is either excellent and unachievably high in price, or in the right price bracket, but not really what we'd want to put the Oak Barrel name on. I assume you guys are probably seeing that as well with so many new players into the market. I mean, just on that, is that auction retail cask price, is that going to keep going foreseeably, do you think, or is that going to peter off a little bit?
Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, there's some absolutely crazy prices going on out there. I mean, the only thing which is really fueling it and will continue to fuel it is the fact that this is a finite commodity. So if you're buying, Mortlachs from the 80s or Port Ellens from the similar era or whatever, there's only a few left. And when they're gone, they're gone. So the price can only go one way. It's that classic scene in Angel's Share, the film,
yep,
when they have 3 or 4 bottles of this priceless whiskey shoved in an old iron brew glass, and one of them drops it.
Yeah.
And they're all in shock and horror, but in fact what they've done is raise the price on the remaining 3 by the equivalent amount, because it's even rarer. So yeah, we're in that kind of period. But I think how that's affecting pricing of younger whiskey, I think that potentially will change. I think that's accelerated unnaturally in the last few years, and I think that needs to have a bit more stability. And that's all about supply and demand. And at the moment, we've got enough supply, which is good.
Excellent. Well, I think we're getting to the point in the Oak Barrel Adelphi Ardnamurchan relationship where the next tastings we do, we can probably almost split them up and do an Ardnamurchan tasting and do an Adelphi tasting. Because I think the past 2 or 3 years, we've married them together after just doing Adelphi tastings. And I think, an hour and a half in the flesh is just not long enough to talk about Ardnamurchan and Adelphi. So I think, that's where we're at. And that's very exciting. And I know that every second we keep you on this stream is a second you're not working on the Ardnamurchan release that we're all very excited to try. And we'll be hopefully coming to Australia. Hopefully we've been nice enough to get some through through Barronals, who've been bringing Adelphi in for many, many years now. But a question I want to throw to Connal, because I know, Alex, you're going to be even more biased than he is at this one. But us Adelphi fan boys and girls in Australia, we're all very, very excited. Connal, you've been obviously a fan now, working at the distillery. You're very, very close to this first release. What is it that's exciting for you, and what is it the bit that you can't wait to put this in front of people in 6-8 weeks' time with the single malt release?
I think what surprised me about the distillery is the consistency factor that we've seen. When I go up there, I sort of camp out for at least a couple of hours and just try new casks, and see what's going on. But for me, I feel that we are quite unique. I mean, every distillery is unique, and I understand that. But I do, trying it blind against other distilleries on the West Coast, I felt that we did stand on our own 2 feet quite well, and I think we've got that flavour, that serious coastalness, and combined with the spirit that's been designed by the late great Dr. Jim Swan, and the wood policy that we've been religiously doing since day one. We should have something quite special to release to you for a young whiskey. I mean, we've waited slightly longer than new distilleries around just now. We're now 6+ years in cask, but we're coming out in about 6 weeks' time with basically a 5-year-old, and we're very much looking forward to sharing it with everyone, and hoping that you enjoy it as much as I certainly did, and certainly putting it together. So yeah, it's been I'm excited, I'm nervous, but yeah, the excitement outweighs the nervousness.
Yeah. Anything to add, Alex, or he summed it up pretty well?
No, he has. I mean, the only thing I would add is that way back when we had the stupid idea of building a distillery, it was a meeting, I think in 2007 or whatever. We went through all the different plans, ideas in concept. And at the end, we just said, look, if it doesn't work, we just lock ourselves in the warehouse and drink it. So we do have a fallback position.
Well, we've got international guests all last night and tonight, and then we're doing a lot of Australians. And the idea is, so next year, when someone has the stupid idea, say in January, I'm going to start a distillery, I've got about 10 hours worth of content to put in front of them and say, watch all these videos, listen to every Australian distiller and all their challenges. But I can offer that as and if it doesn't work, this is how Alex Bruce is going to treat it. So maybe there is, I think, but yeah, look, thank you very much. Rebecca Charlton wrote some excellent tasting notes for the juror, probably the best juror I've ever had. Pascal asked, releasing the single malt, single cask, and the tasting expression all at the same time. You are, aren't they? They're coming out all at the same time, the 3 elements?
Yeah, well,
single cask. Sorry.
No, the single cask might be a little bit later.
Yeah.
But not by much. We're trying to get one more Adelphi release out before the year ends, so it might be tagged along with that. But the single malt and the tasting packs, we're hoping to get out the door end of September, beginning of October.
Yeah, and for those watching from Australia, and I know there's probably a majority of you on social media, after each morning or afternoon after each of these panels during the forum, I write up a bit of a few talking points from each, as well as some information about what's coming up. So I'll have that information and a bit of a mailing list if you want to be on top of that, because we won't see it in 6 months, 6 weeks rather. We'll see it a little bit after that, but we can get your details and send you a note when it arrives in Australia, and all those different things coming up. So we can take care of you on that. But guys, I want to say a very big thank you for taking time out of your morning. I know it's incredibly busy over there, but it's always a pleasure, virtually or in the flesh. And I do look forward to drinking a cold beverage with you at some point, standing up somewhere in a bar. It's always a pleasure, and thank you.
No, thank you for having us on. It's certainly been safer doing this virtually than having to go around all the bars of Sydney to the early hours of the morning.
Yeah. The Scotty gauntlet.
Yeah. The gauntlet, the Clarence Street gauntlet, we call it. And I know you won't get to sign the board this time unless you sign it in on and send me as a PDF. But we'll take that one. I might need to print out a date and put it there on that one. But thanks, guys. And I'm just going to, we'll stay in the Zoom for 2 seconds, but I'm just going to kill the chat on the social media. So thank you. And Yao, cheers for tuning in. Wonderful chat. He says, for those who want to keep drinking, we'll be back at 9 o'clock Australian Eastern Time, where we dive into Japanese whiskey with Stefan, the author of Whiskey Rising. We'll be chatting a little bit about Chichibu as well, which is the next fusion that we'll see as well. So lots of things to talk about there. But thank you guys, and we'll speak to you soon.